Recording in progress. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So, where are you guys?
Well, I need someone where we're at. Okay. Hi, Dr. Light.
Hi.
Just to update you where we are, where we got to last week was it was video 4 in the Mahayana Lojong series where you we did a 20-minute meditation. Remember the content of the first part of it. Preliminary. We talked, yes, you discussed the preliminaries, and I think what followed in that series, the point where we stopped, what continued after that in the series we haven't watched together was you kind of giving an overview of the 7 points before you turned to talk about point 2, ultimate bodhicitta.
Okay. So, any questions from the last couple of weeks where I've not been able to join, or?
But I think it had to do that we had a question in my memory, the difference between truth, ultimate truth or relative truth, and its relationship to bodhicitta.
Okay, good.
Cheryl, do you want to kind of tweak that?
We noted, or people noted, that you were not using the word truths.
Yeah.
You were saying other things, absolutely relevant. Like practice or mindfulness or something. And we didn't know if you were deliberately avoiding that word, because usually you're careful about words, or whatever you wanted to say to us about Dundum and Kunzo.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, so in the Tibetan monastic context, just to give a little bit of cultural and therefore, like religion on the ground, rather than what the book, what books might, impression books might give. So religion on the ground, where it's actually happening. So first of all, Buddhist monks and nuns in the Tibetan Himalayan Bhutanese context, Buddhist monastics are made at a very young age. They are taken as children to the monastery and offered to the monastery. And then they grow up in the monastery, grow up in the nunnery, and depending how big or how small that monastery or nunnery is, education for these young children could be more or less formal. Often, at the very least, they are taught how to read. So they're taught the alphabet, and they're taught how to read. Tibetan spelling is complicated because there are just a number of sounds, and sounds often like several things could have a word that sounds the same. The only way you distinguish them is to look at their spelling. and so the spelling is complicated. So to read out loud what is spelled is something that you have to learn that is not so direct. I think English compared to Spanish is complicated. Spanish is really, I'm understanding. What you see is what you get, you know, you pronounce every single syllable that there is there. And it's, with some rare exceptions, exactly every single time you know to pronounce it that way. You know? So English is complicated compared to that. Tibetan is way more complicated. In fact, a lot of my Tibetan friends have a hard time with spelling because, you know, anyway, so they learn how to read. And then again, depending on the size of this institution that they have been sent to, like village monasteries and nunneries, no further education beyond basic reading. Basic reading is needed because the basic task of a monk or nun is understood to be the performance and the execution of pujas, religious services. Right? Is seen as like the most basic responsibility of a monk or nun. So then the ability to read out loud, to make the sounds, you know, to read out loud all these liturgical and ritual texts is expected of monks and nuns. So then from young, right, they're trained to read out loud. Reading out loud doesn't mean knowing, you know, what it's saying in its complexity. And often these liturgies, these pujas, these sadhanas have layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning. Now, when a monk or nun shows intellectual promise, talented that way, then the monastery or the nunnery will groom them to send them to larger monasteries or nunneries where beyond, you know, learning how to read in order to perform those services is also given. So then they go to those institutions and then they are educated. Now, you know, imagine they're growing up, right? So then up to about the age 20 or so is when they would enter even more specialized studies if they continue to be monks and nuns. At around age 19, 20, they kind of get to choose. Do you want to continue? Or if you want to continue, then you take the complete vows, or at least the highest level of vows that are available, the most extensive level of vows that are available to a man or a woman within that system. Up until recently, women did not have like the complete vows to take. But that changed when the head of in Bhutan made it possible for women to take it if they want it. It's just fantastic, you know. They've been debating this issue endlessly. It wasn't an issue until, you know, Tibet came into the rest of the world, forced by communist Chinese. Then over time, awareness of the existence of this level of vows among principally Chinese Buddhists kind of got Tibetans to think about why they don't have for women. And the short answer is they don't have is because the attempts to start that never took roots in Tibet historically. And so that project kind of fell off the side. There are nuns, but they have been technically novice nuns. But last year, the head of Buddhism in Bhutan, called the Dec4, he unilaterally ordained 100 and something number of nuns with the full ordination. Anyway, that's a footnote. So when they do go study in this seminary, like at the age of 1920, when they decide, okay, I want to remain for life now in this station, in this lifestyle, then they take the highest vows that are available to them, and then they get enrolled in the seminary. And one of the first things that they learn, this is my main point, one of the first things that they learn at the seminary is a topic of studies called, literally it's called definitions. And that, for the most part, involves memorizing standard definitions of technical terms used in Buddhist texts, such as truth, such as ultimate, such as relative, such as aggregates, such as afflictive. Like, what exactly does afflictive in the compound afflictive emotions mean? What range does afflictive cover and what does it not cover? Compounded, uncompounded. What makes something compounded, by what definition is a thing considered compounded, and by what definition is a thing uncompounded? So in there, I think there's, if I remember correctly, there's like 70 topics, basic topics in definitions, and then there are subtopics within those topics. And so a monk or nun beginning seminary is required to memorize these basic definitions. And then from there, you learn various texts, various philosophies, various systems. So this is sometimes what's lacking, and what's, simultaneously it has led to Buddhism being widely kind of appreciated, I think, in the West, because it's fuzzy. Like the word enlightenment, you could assign whatever you want to assign to, right, this word enlightenment. Especially when it doesn't have so much baggage for you. And since, a word like God, right, doesn't figure so strongly in Buddhism, so it's been very attractive to us, because that's a loaded word and there's a lot of baggage there. So we don't want, I don't want to, talk that God business. But these relatively new words to us, enlightenment, afflicted, compounded, uncompounded, aggregates, consciousness, mind, we kind of more or less, we know what it is, and like not needing to define it allows us to fill in all the blanks as we wish. So that is part of what makes Buddhism, relative to maybe other religious traditions, kind of generally has a pretty good feel, in American society, I feel, as opposed to like Hinduism is maybe so out there or so esoteric, and Islam is so demanding. And so Buddhism has gained currency, but at the same time, it is also happening at the cost of perhaps we don't quite know yet. Kind of the full picture of, when we say enlightenment, what we mean. when we say afflictive, what we mean, when we say truth, what we mean, when we say ultimate, what we mean, when we say relative, what we mean.
So in the context of this Lojong training,
Mm-hmm.
as you have said, is an advanced training, right? It's
Yes.
not given generally to everybody. So help us, I think you can help us understand how are we working with
Mm-hmm.
one kind of truth and another kind of truth.
Right, right. Now, what is advanced about this Mahayana Lojong is actually not so much in complexity of like in the intellectual sense, in the academic sense, in the seminary sense, actually. Yeah, what is advanced about Lojong is the the inner work that is happening. In fact, very little technical vocabulary used. And so, according to the legend surrounding the origins of Lojong in Tibet, let me repeat this in case some of you need a revision and some of you are new to this, never heard of this before. The Mahayana Lojong tradition was something that was the specialty of a particular group of Tibetan Buddhists that originated in around the 10th, 11th, 12th century. Late 10th into 11th century. And it originated from this community that traced their origins, at least in Tibet, to a Bengali, an Indian Bengali master, whom Tibetans know as Atisha. And Atisha had traveled from India, invited by a king in Western Tibet to come to Tibet and help the Tibetans revive Buddhism in Tibet. There is a first wave of Buddhist transmission in Tibet that began in the 8th century. And after maybe half a century of very active reception and importing of Buddhism, there was a backlash basically in Tibet. The king that finally came to power at a certain point reversed the policy of the two kings that preceded him. The first 2 or 3 kings that preceded him of Tibet, of unified Tibet, promoted Buddhism, actively sought Buddhism out. And so there were royal patronage. Then this king came to the throne and he opposed the influence of Buddhism on Tibetan society. Then he was assassinated, actually, supposedly by a Buddhist monk, in fact. And that threw the Tibetan empire into chaos. And that empire basically fell apart. And with that, the royal patronage of Buddhism, and then a period of decline. Late 10th century, after Tibet has become fragmented into, the different parts, on the western part, a particular small kingdom, so to say, arose. And so the kings of that kingdom in Guge, in western Tibet, reinitiated the royal patronage of Buddhism and sent people to India, to Nepal, to bring Buddhism to reestablish. So Atisha is one of the key figures. So legend says that Atisha came and spent a good number of years and eventually passed away in Tibet. I think he came to Tibet maybe in his late 40s, something like that, and passed away maybe in his 70s. So his tradition is where this Mahayana Lojong comes from. And according to the stories surrounding this Mahayana Lojong tradition, it is said that Atisha specifically told the disciples whom he taught this approach not to publicize this for a while. Yeah, he told them this is too advanced right now for the general public, so keep this close to your heart and work on experiencing and practicing these instructions, but do not publicly teach this. Instead, publicly, you should teach this other thing that I have been teaching publicly to everyone. Yeah, and that tradition is called stages of the path. In Tibetan, Lamrim. Stages of the path. In a nutshell, what stages of the path is, it's a systematic approach to learning Buddhism and practicing Buddhism. And that involves, for example, learning definition of basic terms, for example. Like that is a particular stage, right? Start with learning definitions, being clear about definitions, because if you're not clear about definitions and then you pick up a Buddhist text, when it says truth, you have your own idea of truth. It has its own idea of truth. Then you're not actually learning from it, you know. So you have to learn those things. So the stages of the path system is very systematic. And Atisha felt like, well, we need to get that clear first, you know. Because part of his charge by the kings is to establish Buddhism, not just as a private personal choice issue. Oh, I like Buddhism a lot, I'm going to adopt it. The kings actually wanted it to be like the dominant worldview, right? So to establish this dominant mainstream worldview requires a lot of systematic approach. So Mahayana Lojong is advanced not in the sense of it having a lot of complex learning involved, you know, philosophical learning and all of that. It is advanced in the sense that the inner work that needs to be done is advanced. But the words, the vocabulary used in this material tends to be minimally technical. Minimally. I mean, it's all relative, right? Compared to the stages of the path material, it's minimally technical. And so, unsurprisingly, in the West, with the transmission of Tibetan Buddhism in the West, Lojong has become so popular, so common. In fact, even, you know, many teachers teach it as a form of Buddhism 101. For the reasons that Atisha's context said, do not teach this openly, is also the reasons why we here now, let's begin with this. Because the context is different. Here, right, you don't have the king or whoever the king is or whoever trying to be the king saying, I would like, Buddhism to be mainstream worldview. And so there is no concern, to do it in a more systematic way. But instead, Buddhism came to this place, came to our context as see if this works for you. In fact, many Buddhist teachers, even without using the word, basically are saying to people, go ahead and cherry pick. Like take what you like and don't worry about the things you don't like. You leave it alone. Go ahead and cherry pick, Of course, now, the development has come to a point where maybe the same people who used to say, go ahead and cherry pick are now saying, you can't cherry pick. Now, truth. I did not notice, and so that therefore maybe it's not deliberate on my part why I did not use ultimate truth and relative truth. But I did, I'm pretty sure, use ultimate and relative in relation to the two bodhicittas.
Yes.
Ultimate bodhicitta and relative bodhicitta. And the reason is because I was, and I will limit myself to the vocabulary used in this text. And the early commentaries on this text would tell us, the second point of the 7 points, which is the main practice, has 10 lines. 5 lines pertain to ultimate or absolute bodhicitta, and the other 5 lines pertains to relative bodhicitta. Obviously, relative and ultimate bodhicittas are related to relative and ultimate truth. Then this takes us then to the question of what is this ultimate truth and what is this relative truth, and what is the relationship between the relative and the ultimate? Which is, if I heard it correctly, which is the question that you guys raised. Now, again, context is important. But so in the context of the Mahayana Lojong in 7 points, and in the context of the trainings of the two bodhicittas, ultimate and relative are two sides of the same coin, two sides of the same hand, front and back. So here then, to call this side ultimate isn't at all to say this side is more important than this side, which is called relative. Yeah. So the relationship between relative and ultimate isn't that of two, what do you call it? Two orders of truth. Very true, not really true. Here, despite the word in English and how we use these two words in English, ultimate doesn't mean more true. and relative doesn't mean less true, and therefore it doesn't mean how can I get from here to here. In other contexts, relative and ultimate are in fact two orders of truth, so that you have to discard the relative to arrive at the ultimate. But this dynamic is not present in the Lojong, Mahayana Lojong in 7 points.
Would that be though present in the stages of the path?
No, not necessarily. It's not in that way.
Okay.
So when you get to like studying a topic such as the two truths, that's part of those definition topics, the two truths. In fact, there's a book published 20 years ago. It's a dissertation from University of Virginia, then got turned into a book. It's called Two Truths According to the Four Main Systems in Late Indian Buddhism. And the four systems is also the grouping of the four systems is accepted by Tibetan seminaries, monastic education system. And they say that basically in India, although there are many variations in terms of different Buddhists holding to different interpretations of the Buddha's teachings, as many as 18 and even more, when you come right down to it, they say you can basically put them into four. So these are known as the Vaibhashikas, the Sautrantikas, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamaka. These are all Sanskrit terms. The Vaibhashikas are sometimes translated into English as the particularists. Kind of a very direct translation. The Vaibhashikas are the particularists. The Sautrantikas are followers of Sutra. The Chittamatra are the mind only, and the Madhyamaka are the middle way. And so there's a book called Two Truths According to the Four Schools. So there is, you can see, according to the particularists, ultimate truth is this, and relative truth is this. And then there they will say, and then according to them, ultimate is what you arrive at when you discard relative. Then in the next level, followers of Sutra, ultimate is like this, relative is like this, and this is the relationship between ultimate and relative. And then the mind only, and then the middle way. Then within middle way, which is supposed to be the most profound, so everybody wants to get to the most profound. So even as the Tibetans study these four, it's kind of like, look at the lower level dummies, they believe this. Then the next level, then the third level. Oh, we are at the fourth level. So everybody in Tibetan Buddhism will like, if you ask a room of Tibetan Buddhists, educated in this four, these four systems, and say, who among you are, adherents of the middle way school, everybody would put their hands up because that's orthodoxy, right? That's the most profound. Even within this middle way group, There are debates that continue to this day. What is the relationship between ultimate and relative? Often, the debate is not what is ultimate. I don't know if that strikes you as interesting or not, but to me, it's very interesting. The ultimate, not much to argue about. It's always the status of the relative. Like, how real is relative truth is always where the main debate is happening. Yeah. So over time, these develop into let's see if let me get the vocabulary right. Mistaken relative truth and unmistaken relative truth. What is mistaken relative truth? That's easier. That's easier to give examples of. Mistaken relative truth is the horns of a rabbit and the child of a barren woman.
Oh, yeah, that clarifies it.
Yeah? So those are mistaken relative truths because they do not exist even relatively. That you think they exist is you have not thought through it. Or the fur of a turtle. There's a winter clothing company in Vermont called Turtle Fur, I think. Clearly, they read Buddhist texts. So those are mistaken relative truths. Unmistaken relative truth is, tables and chairs. That we all can agree it's there, and we use it. And then they also go into how to define mistaken and unmistaken.
Right.
For our purposes, now pivoting away from the word truth, which is so loaded, it's relative and ultimate bodhicitta. So then the relative here, it's relative not because it's a lower order of truth and therefore to be discarded at some point. It's relative because it is working with subject and object. So it's relative in that sense. So subject is I, object is other. Then within this context of I as subject and other as object, to train ourselves to go from I self-centered to other-centered. And all the trainings that are involved to keep moving us from this instinctive but mistaken habit of self-centeredness into other-centeredness. So it's relative bodhicitta because it's working with subject and object. It's ultimate bodhicitta because the training in the ultimate bodhicitta is to break this habit of experiencing reality in terms of subject and object.
Is it,
But we have to be very careful to not think. And therefore, the work of ultimate bodhicitta is more important than the work of relative bodhicitta. So relative and ultimate is held together, so to say, in what I would like to call a creative tension. Yes, there is some sort of stench of implying, right, that subject and object is ultimately not real, to be overcome because of, right, the training in ultimate bodhicitta. But the goal is not to just succeed in ultimate bodhicitta training, because not because, but the goal is cannot be understood as simply succeeding in ultimate bodhicitta training, but also succeeding in relative bodhicitta training, which is this other-centered way of being.
so when you talk about relative bodhicitta, it means you understand the emptiness of that. That is, you wouldn't
So the
say,
emptiness issue belongs to ultimate more.
yeah, but when you say relative bodhicitta, that implies some understanding of the emptiness of the relative aspect. Otherwise, it wouldn't be relative bodhicitta.
Why?
Why? Because it's connected. It can't be without. If you're saying it's bodhicitta, then and there.
What's your
is an
definition of bodhicitta?
understanding that it is relative bodhicitta as opposed to absolute. You have to understand
No.
the absolute quality.
No.
Not at all. Okay.
Now you're privileging absolute bodhicitta.
I thought it would be just more like understanding the
What's your
inseparable.
definition of bodhicitta?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
Look,
Wise mind.
Awake.
The mind that wishes to become enlightened for the sake of all the other beings.
That's relative bodhicitta, yes.
that's relative. Yeah.
Buddha mind,
Yeah.
isn't
So
it?
relative bodhicitta, again, is not a lesser order of bodhicitta.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was. When you say it's relative bodhicitta, then that really elevates it from just relativity.
But that's my point. Relative doesn't mean lower.
Right. I think I'm trying to say that too, but the reason that it's not lower is because of its bodhicitta. It's part of the bodhicitta package,
Love.
Otherwise, it's just relativity. But relative bodhicitta is of a different class than just relativity, without some kind of understanding of the whole thing. I'm not saying that absolutely.
Don't even think of relativity here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I should stop.
It's relative, maybe it has something to do, I was hearing relative as being dualistic. You're still in
Object.
subject object, you're still in the dual world with love.
And you don't get out of it either.
But I point my camera to others.
Correct.
And away from myself.
Yes, and you should keep doing that. Yes.
With love, with compassion.
Yes. Love and compassion. Yes.
Is that?
And love and compassion that is directed in the direction of wanting all beings to be completely freed from the tyranny of confusion. And not just love and compassion that is directed to everybody having 3 meals a day, which is very noble, everybody not having, to drink contaminated water or bad air, which is very noble, but it's not yet bodhicitta. What makes it bodhicitta is when immeasurable love and compassion is being is the force that is propelling you to want to achieve what we call Buddha for the sake of all beings. So
Could you,
that's what we call relative bodhicitta.
what is the force that's compelling me?
Love and compassion, immeasurable love and compassion, compelling you to commit to achieving Buddhahood, achieving full awakening
Yes.
for the sake of others.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
So would it be considered relative because it's to some degree a delusion that there is subject
No,
object?
again, put aside delusion. It's relative because it involves subject and object. No judgment on subject and object.
But I thought that was a delusion.
Never mind, put it aside. Here is irrelevant.
Okay, thank you.
I have to take seriously that there's subject, there's object, and within this subject object, yeah, you have to keep learning how to be other-centered rather than self-centered. That's the main training in relative bodhicitta.
Yeah.
Yes, Karen.
You're muted, Karen.
I can't hear you, Karen. Maybe your microphone.
Okay, it's a little off subject.
Now it works. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I notice people that I love, my friends, and I see a lot of times that they have a lot of love, and then I look out in the world, but there's no compassion with it. I mean, that seems to be, I don't know if we just missed school that day or, missed the handbook or what the deal is.
So what's the difference between love and compassion?
Well, compassion is when you think of others and you put yourself in their
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I think it's harder.
It is.
It's harder. Yeah. Of the two, it's harder. Love is very rewarding. Compassion has a higher price.
It does. They might get something you want.
Yeah. Yeah, so relative bodhicitta wants you to take seriously that there are objects which is all other beings, like infinity minus one. Yeah? This is one. Right now, one generally matters more than infinity, where all of us are parked at. One, generally speaking, more consequential than infinity minus one. So then, in some Lojong traditions, some other texts, they help us in a more gradual way. They say, so first learn how to equalize one with infinity minus one. In mathematical terms, we see how absurd it is, right? Like we even need to work on equalizing one with infinity minus one. Then they say only when we're able to equalize, then can we prioritize infinity minus 1 over 1.
This seems to almost go to the heart of the difference between Eastern and Western way of approaching reality.
Say more?
Well, in the West, we seem to be very much about one.
Oh, well,
Perhaps in the East, they're less interested in the one and more interested in the collection.
well, it depends, I think. You know, they're great examples of self-sacrificing saints and mystics, and you know, I think maybe capitalism
Yes.
and individualism, you know, and capitalism, which is, you know, this poison is spreading everywhere. I don't think the West has special monopoly on.
Probably true.
Yeah, you know.
Can I squeeze another question in?
Yeah, yeah.
Why do we have a need to differentiate between absolute and relative bodhicitta?
It's the method, you know. Yeah, it's the method. Yeah. And that method is based on the fact that there are these two truths. Yeah? So even though the two truths vocabulary is not explicitly addressed in the Lojong in 7 points, you know, the two bodhicitta trainings in the two bodhicittas is informed by the teachings on the two truths. And the teachings of the two truths says that, and so then if you go to the teachings on the two truths, then you can begin by saying that the two truths then are referring to the way things are and the way things appear to be. And that's why. Because we're constantly, right, confronted with that, so to say. And most of the time we're not even like paying attention to that, you know, we are confronted by these two. Why? Because we all have habitually taken what appears to be what is. So what is pertains to ultimate. So here I would say, okay, now we are seeming to say ultimate is more real because it is what is, right? But the actual teachings are saying, no, what appears to be, that you also have to pay attention to. Because it's by skillful paying attention to what appears to be that Buddhas are able to help others. That's why we have to train so much in relative bodhicitta. So that's why it's Mahayana Lojong and not non-Mahayana. Mahayana now not referring to some sectarian form of Buddhism. Mahayana as in that tradition that says, for the sake of all beings, so for the sake of all beings, for the sake of all beings. Non-Mahayana in this context, meaning Hinayana, is only my own business. Not selfish, you know, but it's about scope. There are many days that we have to we find ourselves going into the small scope. Like I cannot deal with your stuff. You know, I mean, you're not a selfish, you know, a-hole for saying that. I'm overwhelmed. Like, back off. I need me time, you know. Yeah, so we all survived Thanksgiving, at least this last one, and then the next triggering event is coming up in like 2-3 weeks for some of us. That's when like right. So it's Mahayana Lojong because the main concern is how can we truly and effectively help others? That's important, truly and effectively, not just I need to help, right? And lead to more suffering. So I need
That's
to help,
basically,
lead to more suffering is one direction not to go. The other direction not to go is the so-called Hinayana, which is, look, I'm not being an ass. I just can't handle all of this. I'm just going to go take care of myself, okay? So excuse me, I got to go now. We, from a Mahayana perspective, we also say, please don't go there. Please don't do that.
that's amazingly helpful. Do you get surprised at how difficult it is to get us to understand these concepts? This stuff is really not that easy.
I know.
Anyhow, that was awesome. The description was really good.
Oh, good.
So is there a Vajrayana Lojong?
Vajrayana is a form of Mahayana. So when we talk about Mahayana, Hinayana in terms of motivation, generally we say there's only these two types.
Oh, okay.
So in other contexts, you have Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. So your question makes sense because there's these three. But insofar as motivation goes, Vajrayana does not have a further motivation. It's parked in the Mahayana motivation of other-centeredness.
Okay.
So no difference in that sense.
Okay.
There are other differences, when you talk about how speedy, how radical, how painful sometimes, this work, then you can differentiate into Mahayana and Vajrayana. But otherwise, on this issue of self-centeredness and other-centeredness, Vajrayana is necessarily other-centeredness.
Thanks.
It's not taught outside of Tibetan Buddhism though, right? Lojong. Is there anybody else?
I would say all Buddhism is, if it is Buddha Dharma, it is Lojong, because it's training the mind, right? I mean, literal. Then you have Mahayana Lojong, then you have Hinayana Lojong, and then you have Lojong as a distinctive tradition that arose out of a particular point in a particular place, etc., etc., etc. Yes, of course not by that definition. Atisha did not go to Japan. Yeah. Jim, I think you were saying something, but with the microphone off.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I was just starting to say, sometimes I have what seems like a clear idea, and then start to open my mouth. It seems pretty mushy. And I have this sense that sometimes there's this vast shared awareness. And my misperception is that it only is inside of me. But really, this same awareness is in all sentient beings.
Mm-hmm.
And when I have a sense of that, as I look at each of you, it's like I'm looking at myself. When I think of self as this awareness, I'm seeing myself looking from different eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, is this kind of awareness what is trying to be cultivated with this teaching?
Yeah, it's definitely an element of other-centeredness, right? When you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and that's Karen's compassion there. I mean, that's not like the full,
Mhm.
development of what the Buddha talked about compassion, karuna, but that is definitely an important aspect, which is, can we imagine walking in the other person's shoes? Not just the fact that the other person's shoes might not fit us, but the fact that it doesn't fit them either, and therefore they are walking around with these blisters. Can you know, imagine walking around with those shoes? It's not like, so in this case, when we say, can you walk in the other person's shoes? The Buddhist addition to that would be to say, but those shoes actually don't fit those people, and actually they're walking around with blisters and bleeding away. Can you imagine walking in those shoes that are causing blisters? And so it doesn't have to get all medieval Catholic, where it's bleeding and all of that. It doesn't have to be so dramatic. But like you say, even just a moment of being aware of, like, oh, I'm not the only one with all this stuff. Every single one of them is with their own stuff. I'm not the only one that has been hurt. Every single one of them have their whole story of being hurt and being disappointed, and
Mhm.
you know and not knowing and being vulnerable, and just a moment of that, right? Is that kernel of compassion, of like other-centeredness already.
Thank you. When I get a taste of this, and I think of, wishing another well, it's really not wishing another well. It's just wishing this awareness well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I can't go very far with that. It's just a glimpse. Every once in a while, but it's something that
Yeah.
seems, and this is what my question is that valid to
Yeah,
follow?
yeah. And this takes us to Mick. We come back to you now.
Yeah.
This takes us to, when we train in relative bodhicitta, if we do it right, because there's always skillful and unskillful ways. I think the operative word is skillful. Right maybe is too strong, than our baggage of right and wrong. Skillful, unskillful. When we skillfully train in relative bodhicitta, yeah, we catch glimpses of self and other becoming irrelevant. Yeah. You're empty.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, but
Don't say
well,
that
it's
out
like-
loud.
yeah, I'm not eating this, but I was thinking about relative practice correctly done is not transactional.
Yes. No. Yes. Of course.
So we're not trying to get to heaven, so
Yeah,
Jesus
no.
opens the door
No,
for us.
not do-gooders, you know.
That's right, it's not transactional in that way.
Yeah. It's
And,
not do-gooders, and it's
and-
not like. It's also not like a way to get somewhere, you know.
And my only point, and I'm not going to mention the E word, I'm just talking about that the way you properly practice relative bodhicitta is from what basis does that can possibly come from?
Mhm.
That activity cannot come from I'm going to get something good out of this. I'm training my mind for this. I'm actually connecting to something
Yes.
that allows me to do that, and you get used to it.
Correct.
You get accustomed to what that taste is.
Yes.
But the
Yes.
taste is there, though.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's all. I'm just like there's some taste that's already primordially there
Yes.
that allows you to actually do relatively correctly.
Yes.
And I'll shut up. That's all I
That's
wanted to say.
And that's why relative truth is where we pay our attention to. How we express, how we communicate, you know, that's the Buddha activities that we have to develop. So
There's
now
so
going
much-
back to that original, not original, one of the points I mentioned in passing, I don't know if you caught, like most of the time, you know, not much to debate when it comes to ultimate truth. The devil is in the details of relative truths. And it's best, you know, to just kind of like, in order to not turn, right, ultimate truth into a false idol, in Judeo-Christian terms, or guard against worshiping graven images as ultimate truth. In the training in relative bodhicitta. So the E word is whispered. Now, of course, you know, training in ultimate bodhicitta, which is, right, the first 5 lines of the second point. Yeah. So if you look there, regard all phenomena as dreams, examine the nature of birthless awareness, let even the antidote be freed in its own place. The essence of the path is settling in the alaya state. In between sessions, be like a child of magical illusion. At least that's the translation that I have. And so these 5 lines, you know, the E word doesn't turn up. The E word turns up in, let's see, which one is it? In one of those precepts, it says, where is it? It does turn up in one place. It says, wait, is this the point 3? I think, yeah. Meditating on confused appearances as the 4 kayas is the unsurpassable protection of emptiness. So that word is only used once in this entire text. So there is a particular style to this tradition. So this is my point, right? That Lojong originally has its own flavor, but because in part of how successful this is, and it has been like taken over by all the other traditions, yeah, then tend to, in some ways, the special flavor of this tradition, I feel, has become kind of watered down or lost. So my goal in dealing with this tradition is I want to imagine, and maybe I'm just making this up, who knows. I try not to just make it up. I do go back and look at the earliest commentaries. I want to try to reintroduce, so to say, to us, the special style and flavor of this tradition. When it was standing on its own, and not everybody has signed on yet. And then when everybody has signed on, which is great, then the more conventional, you know, came in, and then in some ways, it kind of flattened things.
Yeah, but we're all reading all these books, right?
Yes.
We're all, and so it's being taught, but there's nothing wrong with how those people are teaching it to us, right?
Mhm.
We don't take issue with those books that we're reading.
Well,
We're just,
you can take issue if it helps you sharpen your understanding. So in the end, it's not about the teachers. Teachers are always teaching in time and space. Mm. So if there is wrong, right? It's not that the teachers are wrong. It's just time and space, has conditioned a particular presentation. So I say to people, like, don't be afraid. Don't feel like you're betraying anyone or anything, or that you're, when you say, here I would phrase it differently, right? And that allows you to see more clearly. That's all. It's not speaking to who is right or who is wrong.
no, we can just look at the different ways that these people were
Yes,
reading.
exactly.
Okay.
So
Yeah, because Kintaro Rinpoche says he says relative truth,
mhm.
but he probably says relative bodhicitta somewhere else. Who knows?
Yeah. So again, time and space, teacher always teach, right? In time and space. So teachers teach to a particular audience, right? And then often all these books are often transcripts of teachings that have been given in time and space. And then, so we just need to know not to turn them into graven images, right? Cheryl and Mick, we have had conversations about, what would Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings look like if he lived another 40 years, right? It's not like he changed his mind, but his audience became more and more matured in a particular way. Then how he talks about the material, of course is going to change. But then he died when he died, and then those words became like Moses and his tablets, for some people, so like I said, my kind of laying some of my uh, my sets of values, so to say, at the introduction to Buddhism class, I talked about how I think, our problem is not so much like we can't see that we are one in so many ways. We are the same in so many ways. I think the bigger problem is we cannot accept that we are not the same in also many other ways. Like learning how to, accept that, yeah, well, no, we're different,
I think that's a great topic for us to pursue together here, because we do have this range of exposure and
Yes.
practice in this group, and people have all these different things, and it actually comes up, well, I see it like this and I see it like that, and that's the right way that means it's working, right?
Yes.
We're not here to try to all agree on anything.
Yes. Exactly.
Right, I agree.
No.
Hey,
Wait, don't be so quick to agree.
It's just like it's, anyway. I hate it.
It's the beauty to be able to respect everybody's view.
Yeah, right? Hiroshige is 36 views of Mount Fuji.
Yeah.
And not to be, misunderstood, I think as well, or there's always footnotes, right? That anything goes.
You know, there's one thing though, you as an academic, there's one thing that I see sometimes, that it seems that the academic approach is to parse things. You know, there's a romantic maybe, or religious approaches, which are more like, well, it feels good, so I believe it, or I don't know. But you are very good at discerning, this and that, and well, they said it like this, and I say it like that, and
Yeah.
that seems to come from an academic.
I would also argue that and the mainstream Tibetan academic tradition is also subscribes to that value.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
But it's very
Which
confusing.
in the end, why I park myself in Tibetan Buddhism and not in the other forms of Buddhism, if you ask me, because there is something in Tibetan Buddhism that actually values that way.
Yes, I agree. And for people coming at it, Westerners coming at it from the outside, we're always in our notebooks going, wait, which one is it? Is it this one, right? Stop doing that, because they'll go, it's like this, but then no, it's like this, but no.
Mhm.
It's frustrating, it's difficult, it's
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah.
Want it nailed down, It's funny, Karen's teacher, Kendra, was here talking about his book.
Mhm.
And he gave this really great story about, and you probably know about this, he was leading a tour of people in Tibet. And he's a Tibetan, so they would go where they're gonna go. And nobody worried about but there was an American who was like, but wait, what time are we leaving? Where are we gonna eat lunch, and what are we gonna eat? Where are we staying tonight? And it was like amusing to him, because the guy couldn't, just go.
Yes, in this group, Melissa has traveled with me. So I take people, I have never taken, the numbers that Kendra Rinpoche has taken, 200 people, but
Yeah.
a small version of that. Oh yes, when people get on the road, some people just thrive, and some people it just, all reference points have fallen away, and it really unnerves them, and they need to know. Yeah, I've been yelled at for being like playing mind games with them, not giving information that I know, that I'm using power over them. Believe me, I've been yelled at during these tours and I'm just like, actually, you're giving way too much credit to what's going on here. This is called being in Asia. Nobody really knows what's happening next, because nobody really cares what's happening next.
Right.
I remember, I remember on one time on the bus when I was looking at our itinerary, and you walked up and said, "Oh, just so you know, this is just a loose plan," or something.
And yeah, because if you don't have a loose plan, then it really, like, it's going to be all over the place, So you have a reference point, and then you also know, well, then there's reality, right? Then there is traffic jam, then there is people being exhausted, and it's like,
And then, like in China, it was the police. They.
Oh, right, and then there's that, right?
There's that, and they'd
Then
say,
there's
"Oh, no,
bureaucracy,
you're
right?
not. Oh, no, you're not going to do that." And we'd say,
Then there's bureaucracy. And so, and anyway, yeah, like I said, so there is something in Tibetan Buddhism, which, the Dalai Lama says they inherited this from the Nalanda tradition, which is a very vibrant intellectual tradition that encourages debate, debate not in the sense of like unprincipled debate, yelling at each other, but principled debate, like let's agree on what are the givens here, and given the givens, okay, now let's see how many way, we can disagree here. um, and and so that is something that is emphasized. And then, like, fast forward, so those of you who know this term called Rime, right? The non-sectarian movement that became a rallying point for many Tibetan Buddhists in the late 18, into the 19th century. So non-sectarian here, unfortunately, I think in the when it came to us here in the West, non-sectarian, as far as I can tell, has just become for people, Rime, specifically this term Rime, has become basically either I don't want or I can't connect to one clear teacher or number of teachers, so I'm just going to cherry pick whatever I want, and then I will call it myself non-sectarian. But the original meaning of Rime, at least in the late 18th, 19th, early 19th century, it is not about, well, for sure it's not about cherry picking, but it's also not about, it's also not about like, oh, everything is the same. In fact, meticulously, all the differences are kept. I'll give you one example, not from the philosophical debate example. So part of this Rime non-sectarian movement, which was centered on two figures really, but there's 2+1. The two figures were, some of you, these are names that you recognize. For some of you, it doesn't, but one is Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, and then there is Jamgong Kongtru. Jamgong Kongtru Lodro Taye, and then there is Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. So these two were the main people with the Rime. And the +1 is Chogyal Lingpa, because he wasn't exactly like his contributions were important, but he wasn't the two like kind of leading the charge. Was these two lamas, Jamgong Kongtru Lord Otaye, and which has a hybrid Kagyu Nyingma identity, and then Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, which has a Sakyapa identity. So part of their non-sectarian movement was is like seeking out all the various and sundry transmissions of not just theory and philosophy, but more so all the obscure lineages of deity practice of this type and that type. And they went like all over the Tibetan landscape, hearing any rumors that, because they read in the books and said, Atisha brought this tradition, for example, but then at a certain point, this particular transmission of this practice of the Buddha of compassion with 3 heads and 6 hands fell into obscurity, right? So maybe a mention like that. Yeah. So then what Jamgon Kongtru and Khyentse Wangpo did was like, okay, let's do some investigative work and see when was the last time someone practicing this was mentioned anywhere. So then they go investigate. Sometimes they send disciples, sometimes they went themselves, until they find someone who says, actually, I still have this. Then they will request, okay, can you give me the transmission, give me the empowerment, and I'm going to fix, your ritual text, because over the years, maybe it got messy. Let me edit that and let me republish that, and then let's pass this on. So, in many of these cycles of ritual practice, there are these like ritual cards called takli. They are basically visual aids for, first of all, for all the different forms of deities. So rather than big like painted tankas, because there are like literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these practices, but you have these little kind of like the size of our baseball cards, really, but instead of it's like deity baseball cards, okay? That they would trade or copy, like so if I found this transmission and I want to continue it, either the current holder is so old and he thinks like, he doesn't have much time left, and he said, okay, you can have my baseball card, or here, you can copy this. Now, obviously, those are kind of one of a kind in a way, right? But then together with that practice, there might be a mention of like, you need to make the 8 royal symbols as part of the practice. You need to offer the 8 royal symbols, the 7 royal symbols, the 8 auspicious symbols. So then there are also cards that depict the 8 auspicious symbols, right? Now, the 8 auspicious symbols, they are standard, how they look. But Khyentse Wangpo and Jamon Gongtrul, they make the point that if it is this transmission that they got from this Lama, and he has a set of the 8 auspicious symbols, right? Gongtrul and Wangpo, Khyentse Wangpo did not say, oh yeah, we have the 8 auspicious symbols, so that's fine. We don't need to copy that. No. They carefully copied that set and noted to say, this is from the 3-face, 6 arms Buddha of compassion ritual system of the 8 auspicious symbols, and kept that intact. And so many sets of 8 auspicious symbols, which to you and my eyes are probably like, it's the 8 auspicious symbols, they look kind of the same, what's the big deal? They were so careful in preserving differences. Yeah, they were so careful in preserving differences, because these differences, right, you don't have to be literal about it, but I feel our attitude has to be, these differences are all part of the 84,000 different methods that the Buddhas have used to benefit beings. Let's not diminish any one of them. Let's preserve the distinctiveness and the integrity of each of them. So So now you have a different relationship with difference, you know, seeing it in those terms.
Thank you.
Oh, 138 for me. 12.
Yes, Tom, we have to stop.
So you have a next group coming, and
Yeah, and are you coming, are you gonna be around in the next couple of weeks or what?
it's kind of hard to say.
Okay, okay, I'll not try to pin you down.
I'm not conducting a tour through Asia with you, but still a little bit hard to say. I think next Sunday I should be available.
Okay,
Great.
wonderful.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All take
Thank-
care. And,
Thank you, Dr. Lai.
good. And
Good to see you.
I
Bye.
give up.